Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Ellie Finkelstein, campaigner and news editor at Freedom United, a global anti-modern slavery community. We are working to raise awareness and to turn that awareness into mobilized action to build power for change and ultimately a world resilient to exploitation. Today's conversation focuses on the links between human trafficking and the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and peoples, often referred to as MMIWP. While this discussion centers on the US context, the patterns we're talking about today echoes in Canada, where I'm speaking from, and globally, wherever Indigenous communities face systemic marginalization, violence, and exploitation. The term MMIWP refers to the disproportionate rates at which Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit people, and other Indigenous peoples goes missing, are exploited, or are murdered. The crisis does not exist in isolation. It is deeply tied to broader systems of colonial violence, jurisdictional gaps, economic marginalization, and institutional neglect, all of which create conditions where trafficking and exploitation can flourish. At Freedom United, we've also been raising awareness about the removal of the Not One War report, a congressionally mandated report documenting systemic failures contributing to the MMIWP crisis. Its removal is deeply concerning because it reflects a broader pattern of erasure and deprioritization, where the realities of Indigenous communities face are minimized, overlooked, or pushed out of public view. Today's event is an opportunity to listen directly to Indigenous advocates and experts who are working on these issues every day, to better understand the connection between trafficking and the MMIWP crisis, and what meaningful accountability and change looks like. We'll start with introductions from each of our incredible panelists, followed by a panel discussion moderated by Brandy and myself, and then we'll open the floor to audience questions. We'll do our best to keep the event within the hour, but given the serious and personal nature of this topic, we want to make sure that we allow space for a thoughtful discussion. The Q&A may run slightly over time, so please stay if you're able. If questions come up for you during the discussion, please post them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you're sharing about the event online, please tag us at Freedom United HQ. Thank you again for being here and engaging in this important conversation. Brandy, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself and your connection to the MMIWP crisis before we introduce the other panel members.
Hello, good morning. My name is Brandy Dieterle-Radati. I am on the board of directors of Freedom United. I'm also a human trafficking expert with current projects in Ghana, Nepal, Kenya, and throughout Central and South America. I'm also a cultural anthropologist. At the age of 19, I went to China to work. There, I was brutally sex trafficked. I returned home to the United States. I did not find any services sufficient for the severity of trauma that I experienced. I put my experience in educating my intention to educating myself and working with the immigrant refugee communities, especially using my Mandarin Chinese and Spanish language abilities. Eventually, I became a human rights commissioner for the city of Portland. And in 2016, elders Linda Looking and Buzz Nelson came to the Human Rights Commission asking for assistance to organize marches and prepare a caravan to go to Standing Rock to fight against the DAPL pipeline. I'm an enrolled citizen of Cherokee Nation, but I was disconnected through these elders and Water is Life, Minnie Wachoni. I was able to be involved in my community and started to change my human trafficking efforts to work within our community. I became a member of the Pacific Northwest Council of Water Protectors. In 2023, we had an MMIW, Wilma Acosta, that went missing. No one but her elderly parents were able to look for her. We have this idea that if you go missing, that police were going to come, that somebody's going to come. But the truth is, no one's coming. No help is coming unless it comes from our community. We put together a group of volunteers. There was nobody to help. She was from out of town. And we searched the riverbanks, the abandoned buildings, the wilderness areas, the outdoor encampments. We helped the family engage with law enforcement. We expected partnership. But in fact, we only found performative cooperation and indifference. We weren't taken seriously. We had jurisdictional limitations and very little information received long after the fact. At one point, one of our tribal boats found a mass in the river right where Wilma was last seen. The police were not able to investigate or look into that for several days. And by the time they did, nothing was there. It still took several more weeks of the family searching in agony for her remains to surface and to be found. Due to the gaps that we experienced in this, my brother and I created the Native American Emergency Response Oregon, which provides emergency support and preparation for our community, as well as boots on the ground search and recovery efforts. Here I have with me Kimberly Smart, who is the founder of MMIW Search and Hope Alliance. She trains and educates, supports volunteers and MMIWP family members who are searching for loved ones. And we also have Sabrina Griffith, who is an amazing MMIWP advocate and a survivor herself.
Thank you, Brandy. Hello, my name is Kimberly. I come to this work with very lived experience that I carry every day. I was adopted twice as a child. Growing up wasn't easy. 6 years ago, I stepped into the movement for missing and murdered Indigenous people. I could just no longer stand by at a distance from all the violence I've witnessed in my life and continue doing nothing. At 15, I watched a man get murdered in front of me. I was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the image never left me. In my early 20s, I was at a friend's house when there was a drive-by, and I held my friend's head together after he was shot. Those moments are not abstractions for me. They are memory, they are sound, they are weight. In 2017, I lost my best friend, Shay Martinez, who's Native and Hispanic. She was vibrant and loved. She was killed by her boyfriend after sustained domestic violence. I sat with her in a hospital for 5 days after surgeons removed the left side of her skull, hoping that her brain would swell less. And it was not enough. She died, and so did a piece of me. And I should have been a statistic. I'm here as a walking, talking testimony, what one changed life can accomplish and how we can end suffering for so many. I'm here to give a voice to the voiceless. This is why I do this work. At MMIW Search and Hope Alliance, we recover remains. We stand with devastated families. We hold space for grief that has no tidy ending. We face violent death head on because we must, because our relatives and the families deserve to be found, named, and honored. My story is not the center, but it is the reason that I refuse to look away. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimmy. Jela, Shaushi, Sabrina. Hello, my name is Sabrina. I'm an enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz, bands of Tututni, Chetco, Klamath River, and the Joshua people. I am an MMIWP community advocate, heavily involved in search and recovery efforts, and volunteer for MMIW Search and Hope Alliance. My advocacy is deeply rooted in lived experience, a survivor of childhood kidnapping, sexual abuse, and later domestic violence. Those experiences shaped my life, but did not silence me. Today, I use my voice to stand for those who cannot. I believe stories carry power. By speaking out, raising awareness, and standing together, we can bring visibility, justice, and healing to our communities and ensure that our Indigenous lives are never ignored, silenced, or ever forgotten. I want to address how important it is to take a culturally grounded approach. This is essential because protecting our relatives means centering Indigenous voices, our traditions, and community-led solutions.
Thank you, Brandy, Kimberly, and Sabrina. I'm going to move on to the discussion portion of this event. Uh, I'll start with the first question, but first I'll add some context. Growing up in Canada, I became aware early on of the crisis of MMIWP. I also noticed how differently cases were covered in the media. When a non-Indigenous person went missing, it often dominated news cycles, while Indigenous cases frequently received little attention or visibility. Though my work in the anti-trafficking sector, I've also come to see how rarely the links between trafficking and MMIWP are discussed together. So, my question I will ask to both Sabrina and Kimberly is from your perspectives, how do trafficking and the MMIWP crisis intersect in ways people outside Indigenous communities may often fail to recognize? Sabrina, I will go to you first.
Thank you, Ellie. I do believe how living in poverty, housing instability, foster care involvement, gaps in legal system make Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited more likely to be targeted. Systemic neglect, lack of healthcare, mental health care, inequality in healthcare, again, gaps in the system. Trafficking victims may be labeled as runaways, criminalized, rather than treated as victims, as they are. Misclassification reduces urgency and resources for investigations. Trafficking networks often operate along transportation corridors and industries near reservations, making Indigenous women, girls, and people targets.
Okay. So again, my name is Kimberly, and Indigenous children and people are trafficked from Canada into the US using the I-5 corridor, and victims are being trafficked to the southern borderlands and back and forth. There's no real monitoring that's being done. The victim demographic, with the vast majority coming from Canada into the US and Mexico, about 94 to 98% of these are Indigenous children and women under the age of 18. Washington alone has seen a 70% increase in identified trafficking victims since 2021. Indigenous targeting, despite being only about 5% of the North American population, Indigenous women and girls account for over 50% of trafficking victims in North American regions, including the Pacific Northwest. The unfortunate fact is that the Pacific Northwest is a hotspot for child sex tourism, trafficking, and pedophilia, which all play a huge role into Indigenous people's trafficking. With very little resources, extremely lax laws, and little to no sentencing for our predators, which end up being just a cesspool of predatory groups that go unpunished and undetected. Indigenous children and people are at a higher risk of increased being re-trafficked because of low visibility on them when they go missing. The Indigenous people demographic um, get less media attention and less visibility to when they are going missing. The Indigenous community pays the biggest price. Our Indigenous community also faces erasure already through systemic and cultural violence, and now traffickers are taking our children and our women. We literally have people traveling the globe to the Pacific Northwest to violate our Indigenous children and women. So for those of you out there listening, please let that sink in. Thank you. Brandy?
Yeah. MMIWP and human trafficking have significant overlap. In 1978 in the United States, there was a Supreme Court decision which said that tribes did not have jurisdiction to prosecute any non-native crimes, on any crimes perpetrated by non-natives. So that means that non-natives who lived on reservations or came onto reservations to murder, to rape, to kill, to traffic faced zero consequences. In 2013, they passed the Violence Against Women's Act, the VAWA Act, which allowed the natives to finally prosecute non-natives, but only in limited circumstances for domestic violence and protective orders. It wasn't until 2022 the VAWA expanded to finally include sex trafficking as one of the offenses that tribes could prosecute. So between 1978 and 2022, which is 44 years, people were able to commit crimes against tribal people without any consequences and with total impunity. The Bureau of Indian Affairs estimates that non-natives commit 96% of sexual violence against Indigenous women here in the United States. Traffickers will often share how they target victims once they're in jail and after out of the game. They talk about how they search for vulnerable people and youth, especially in public places such as powwows and sporting events. Traffickers can be family members, romantic partners, employers, and community members. Uh, people look for people on the fringes, people that may be victims, people that maybe might not be noticed if they went missing. For signs of poverty, sign of isolation, low self-esteem, signs of addiction, poor mental health. And note that LGBTQ and two-spirit individuals are especially vulnerable. LGBTQ youth are twice as likely to be sex trafficked than the regular population and 7 times more likely to experience sexual violence. So traffickers are look to exploit those vulnerabilities, and in exchange, they offer support, romantic relationships, access to drugs and alcohol, employment, housing, social acceptance. Maybe they're offering promises to be treated like an adult or be taken seriously. They find people on the outside and give them an identity and a place to be before they start to ask for sex or other options in return. They form an emotional bond to establish trust, and then the coercion starts to be expected to be paid back for their help through sex work, prostitution, sex slavery, or non-consensual virtual content shared on OnlyFans for money. Traffickers are able to maintain control by imposing debts for violence, forced criminality, which means forcing victims to participate in crimes. So now that they are afraid to go to police or to because of the consequences for themselves, they prey on shame and social isolation. They make it worse. They do what they can to make sure you're stuck in that loop. Sometimes those that are being trafficked identify with their traffickers over time, and it becomes complicated. So much that some victims actually become traffickers themselves and recruiters. In Indigenous communities, human trafficking might be incorrectly downplayed or normalized as just as domestic violence or a toxic relationship or a bad family situation. But if another person forces you to have sex for others, in exchange for money, drugs, housing, that is human trafficking. The Indian Law Resource Center says that 4 out of 5 Native women have experienced interpersonal violence, and more than half of Native women have experienced sexual violence. The majority of perpetrators for sexual violence and trafficking against Native communities in the United States will be never brought to justice. Traffickers know this. Abusers know this. Almost 6,000 women and children go missing every year in the United States. But less than 3% of the United States population identifies as Native American, but over 50% of trafficking victims in the United States are Indigenous. And that is just since we started counting. In 2023, 75% of MMIWP were children. Sabrina, your advocacy work supporting search efforts for missing relatives are deeply rooted in community and personal experience. Could you share what brought you into this work?
Yes, thank you, Brandy. This work is deeply, deeply personal to me. My commitment stems from traumatic experience that has profoundly shaped who I am. At the age of 2 years old, just a baby, I was kidnapped and sexually abused. This act of violence permanently altered my life in ways I could never understand. Later, at the age of 10 to 13, I was sexually abused by an older relative. What really angers me and hurts me about this is when I did try telling someone, they told me to stay quiet so it didn't hurt their family. Don't stay quiet. What about what happened to me? A few years later, I was held against my will by somebody I trusted. And when I tried to escape, I was violently beaten. The damage done is long lasting, not just in the moment that it happens. A long struggle with medical complications, numerous surgeries, and a lot of pain. I share my story not to only acknowledge what I've survived, but to give voice to the long-term effects that abuse can have. Effects that are often unseen, misunderstood, overlooked. I understand trauma, survival, and long-lasting damage. This is why I'm committed to supporting survivor-led spaces. Because of my history, I believe this is something to approach with deep respect and responsibility. Survivor spaces are not a place for outside voices to dominate. They are places where people can reclaim their voice, tell their own truths, define what justice and healing looks like for them. My voice is grounded in accountability and care. I care. We really care. I believe meaningful support means centering survivors' voices. Our voices mean something. Protecting their safety and recognizing that the strength it takes for people to speak out and tell about their experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina, for trusting us with your story and for grounding this conversation in real, lasting impacts of violence. What you've shared also speaks to how often individuals and communities are left to carry this burden on their own. Kimberly, something that has already been raised in the discussion is that when Indigenous relatives go missing, families and community members are often the first responders who organize searches, raise awareness, and support each other when institutions fail to act. Through your work at MMIW Search and Hope Alliance, you've been directly involved in coordinating search efforts. Could you share what that work looks like in practice and what communities are often forced to take on themselves when systems fail to respond?
Sure. Thank you, Ellie. So we're a boots on the ground volunteer search group. We are the only one like it in our state that deals primarily in missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. We gather our team of diverse volunteers, which also sometimes will include families of the missing. As soon as we know we will be searching, we map out our area that we believe will be beneficial to the search. We work on a by process of elimination in grid mapping. Once we cover a small part of the grid, we move to the next and to the next and to the next. We use equipment, dogs, we line search. We do go into some of the most remote parts of the land looking to recover remains. Whether we're on off-road vehicles, horse, foot, we go out there, shotguns, machetes, and we go out and look. And in a sense, we're the cleanup crew. When everyone else stops looking, when state and federal resources are exhausted and stop, we do not. We step up, we step in, and we don't stop until results are yielded. We team up with other Indigenous nonprofits like the Future Generations Collaborative, Native American Emergency Response. We also join up with groups of SAR, and we join with nonprofits like Oregon's Vanish and Oregon's Missing Persons because we know that it takes a community to do this type of work. They all come out and offer us operational support. We always go through a line of communications and specialized protocol with our federal, state, local law enforcement entities. We are here because we want to amplify the screams of those who have been silenced. Kind of moving on to the second part of that question, families are left standing with the gap because there's a lack of alert system, there's a lack of media coverage, and the data gaps and outdated records, and there's no live monitoring for missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. And here in Oregon, we've already found a 14-year gap in Indigenous missing persons. There's a lot of jurisdictional barriers and the burden placed on our families, the advocate after devastation. There is no real long-term help for any of our Indigenous communities in anywhere. But I would like to kind of leave us with these last thoughts. The trafficking of our Indigenous children and women often involve people they know. And I think Brandy already touched on that subject. And traffickers lure our young children from rural areas and reservations, and they take them to huge, vast urban areas, and the victims are then distributed. And a combination of known and unknown exploitive threats to our Indigenous children and women 88% of that violent crime is also committed by non-Native persons. So thank you, Ellie.
Thank you, Kimberly. The work that you described shows both the urgency and the immense burden that communities are carrying. It also highlights how much of this work is about not only response, but prevention and long-term support. Brandy, building on that, could you speak to what prevention and recovery look like in Indigenous communities when it comes to both MMIWP and human trafficking?
Yes, thank you. Prevention and recovery in the Native community are somewhat similar. Prevention can look like youth and economic education on healthy relationships, violence prevention, financial empowerment, remembering that traffickers exploit vulnerabilities, substance use prevention, recovery, accessible youth programming, re-entry programs for people on the fringes, access to ceremony and cultural traditions, mentorship programs, and building strong interconnected communities where we check on each other. Recovery related resources are needed for victims, but also for advocates, for members of the community, and even for the offenders. As Indigenous peoples, our collective nature is in opposition to the Western mindset of individuality. Folks from collective cultures tend to experience enhanced trauma and distress and reaction. Sorry about that. Collective folks, we are in opposition to individuality. And so we experience advanced trauma and stress in reaction to social isolation, which in turn exacerbates mental health and the use of unhelpful coping mechanisms, which includes perpetrating violence and trafficking against others. Moral injury is something when something happens to us, something that we witness, or something that we see that is done to us that is against our moral fiber. And this will cause a loop of shame and social isolation, which hinders recovery and makes healing difficult. Collective peoples need a place of belonging and a role and identity in their community to overcome these type of moral injuries. If you feel shame thinking you are damaged or not good enough, you have an unaddressed moral injury. We're more than just our mistakes, which is an important thing to bring to the community. Recovery and prevention means creating opportunities again for people in difficult circumstances. Here in Oregon, Robert Van Pelt and ancestor Stuart Crazy Bull organized the Lakota Club at Oregon State Penitentiary, OSP, where incarcerated Native men learn to drum, powwow, participate in ceremony, and gain life skills from community members that visit and teach them. They created the House of Waboka, which is a narcotics anonymous group that morphed into an open drum group, which welcomes former Lakota Club members once they get out of jail, as well as prison, as well as community members in all stages of their recovery. We come together to share food and laughter and drum medicine. Folks that may be in difficult circumstances and dealing with trauma and shame now have a place where they can go, that they're accepted and encouraged and exposed to community members who've already been through the same difficulties that they've been through. MMIWP work and prevention is about enduring and thriving despite generations of violent removal from our lands, forced assimilation, outlawed ceremony, erased languages, and systematic disruption. We've had destruction of our natural resources, our Indigenous family units, and our natural support systems for ourselves. We are resilient because of the strength and courage of our ancestors. There are thousands of Indigenous adults who have gone through the Wellbriety and Red Road addiction and abuse recovery programs, who have overcome deep personal traumas and barriers to become valuable assets and leaders in our communities. Thriving communities are MMIWP and human trafficking prevention. One of the biggest gaps I've seen is I've been on human trafficking panels and task force across the country. Very rarely do I see Indigenous folks or Indigenous interests represented at the table. To address the gaps that we've mentioned here today, what I would really like to see is legislation that mandates and formalizes partnerships between law enforcement and local Indigenous communities on responses to MMIW in every state, as well as increased prioritization and funding for culturally appropriate prevention and recovery efforts.
Thank you, Brandy. What you shared brings together a lot of the themes that we discussed today, from prevention, recovery, and the importance of community, cultural connection, and Indigenous-led solutions. We are coming to the end of our discussion portion, but I'd like to turn to both Sabrina and Kimberly to give some final remarks before we move on to the Q&A. My question is, what is one thing you hope people listening today will take away from this conversation? Kimberly, I'll go to you first. Kimberly, I'm just going to ask to unmute. There we go.
Sorry about that. Thank you. We cannot fight this alone. I'm a firm believer in reaching out to the outside communities. The Indigenous community knows there is a problem with our people going missing and murdered at an alarming rate. But we cannot just continue to discuss this problem amongst ourselves. Then we just become an echo chamber. We must invite the outside communities in. We must invite them in to help us take action and search for our missing and help us advocate for the murdered and the families of the murdered. We have to become a united front to shed light into the darkest of places. Human trafficking is real. The predators are preying on our Indigenous communities at an alarming rate. We already face an erasure of our people because of so many other systemic failures. Now we are battling human trafficking, and traffickers are selling our children into slavery for sex, labor, and more. Thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly. I believe by leading drivers recognize the signs of trafficking and speak up when something doesn't feel right. Supporting Indigenous-led organizations, support efforts, and families who are looking for their loved ones. Demand accountability from the systems that are meant to protect our people. If there are a couple things I hope you take away from today, it is this. Every person is someone's whole world, and every child deserves the chance to grow up safe, protected, and loved. So please be kind. There's enough evil in this world. The person right next to you, sitting right next to you, standing right next to you, could be the person that is missing someone or a survivor themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, Sabrina, and Brandy, for this really meaningful and important conversation. We've had some people post in the Q&A, so I'm going to move on to the question section. And if you have questions, you can still add them to the Q&A, and I'll try to get through as many as we can. So one question from Holisha. They are saying that there is a serious issue of child and human trafficking in the state of Oklahoma, and that traffickers are getting more crafty. And after having incident relations with children, then use their local community partners to attempt to silence or tamper with the parent or sibling of the child being used and being exploited. I have had issues with the Muskogee County Police and others that are covering up for this ring. Please assist with more information on how to counter these malicious cowards that are attempting to silence victims and whistleblowers. How the QA will work is I will ask questions, and Brandy, Sabrina, and Kimberly, if you just want to volunteer if you have anything to respond to that specific question, then just jump in.
One thing I'll say is that there are a lot of difficulties working with law enforcement and with systems. There's not a lot of information sharing. There's confidentiality. There's all types of things going on. There are difficulties. There are places that are known to be trafficking hotspots. There are people that are known, and they're known, and yet they still exist. It's easy to draw those lines and say that law enforcement is responsible. And I don't know the particular situation, and I'm not saying they're not. I don't know, but that is part of why we need some kind of framework to have cooperation between Native, Indigenous communities and families and the law enforcement. If we're just approached as any other victim of crime and families, it's not sufficient for us. And so we have these feelings of the police um, participating in the exploitation. So keep up your efforts. I would say build up the strength around the survivors and the families in the community. Let it be known in the community to protect yourselves and from things that you know, and also keep trying to get those formalized partnerships so that we can start supporting our communities.
Thank you. Go on to the second question. This is from Bozena. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing anyone's name. Their question is, has MMIW had representatives at the Commission of the Status of Women at the UN? I know the 2026 will be the 70th session. I don't know if anyone knows that answer, but it's worth asking. It's a good question.
I am unaware. I would not know that answer.
I definitely think it's something that I will definitely look into that. It is a good point that should be raised. So thank you, Bozena. Next question is from Ash, and I will answer this. Will resources be shared regarding the data shared in this presentation? So tomorrow I will send out an email of the recording of this webinar, and I will gather resources and I will ask Kimberly, Brandy, Sabrina to give any resources that they have and in the email. So if you are registered to this, you will definitely be getting that email. Also, this webinar will be posted on our website, and in that description, we will also provide resources. Thank you, Ash. The next question is from Mercy. 90% of victims of human trafficking and sexual violence are from humble backgrounds. How can you help them out? I think that is, we discussed, especially the beginning when Sabrina was talking about the different systemic and social determinants of health and economic marginalization that often intersects and makes one vulnerable specifically to being exploited or so I'm wondering if anyone wants to expand.
I think that forming educational programs in your local area is a very, very good idea. There's a lot of different webinars and things that people can educate themselves with, and then take that information that they have and don't be afraid to step out and create these educational programs to go out to different communities in your community. There's a lot of nonprofits here in the Pacific Northwest that offer educational things and awareness events. You can always join in on those. There's a lot of anti-human trafficking events you can get involved with. My number one thing is to say, get involved. And if you are suspicious, the old saying goes, if you see something, say something. In this case, if you feel that there's a vulnerable person being preyed upon, it's okay to say something. It's okay to speak up. Even if it's your partner, your friend, no matter who it is, speak up and say something to another safe person, law enforcement entity. A lot of times, domestic violence centers make a report, because silence is what happens when we start ignoring the problem. But when we give the problem a thunderous voice, then there's no escape for that.
Yeah, and I would also like to say, as you said, victims tend to be from lower socioeconomic levels, dealing with poverty because of those extra vulnerabilities. But in our communities, in our Indigenous communities, We're accustomed to feeding lots of people with low resources in our ceremony communities. We get people together, large groups, and we share food, we share love, we share wisdom. So building up our communities, building up places where even though we don't have much individually, all together we have enough. And so creating these networks and these connections where although folks may be struggling with rent, struggling with feeding their kids, that there's enough support in the community to be able to ask for help or to pool resources so that the vulnerability is lessened.
And if you feel that you're not getting anywhere, or your voice is not mattering, it does. Just keep speaking out, keep telling someone. If the person you told doesn't listen, or they tell you to be quiet, or not to speak up about what is going on, tell the next person. Tell somebody that you know that knows you, and that you can trust with what you have to say. And just keep telling the next person. If that doesn't work, and they ignore you, or if they don't want to listen, tell someone else. Don't keep it inside. Tell people. It really matters. Your voice matters. It'll reach someone. It really will.
In the vulnerable population, I really want to bring to the surface is more than just our children. The vulnerable population are those suffering from mental health challenges, those suffering from addiction struggles, a lot of women that have low self-esteem, people that have never been built up. You will find sex trafficking in your strip clubs, in your casinos, through unfortunate large organizations. And so the vulnerable population exists everywhere, whether you're in city, rural, no matter what, always keep your eye out.
I have a follow-up question from Ash that I think is a good segue from the previous question. What are the best ways outside organizations can approach Indigenous groups to build connection and collaboration?
Ask to be a part of it. Say, hey, I want to join in. What can I do to help? And I know for our particular volunteer group, I'm always like, I love help. Come in and serve with us, whether we're serving dinner to our elders or breakfast to the community. We have volunteer events all the time. Sometimes it shows support at powwows, and come and get to know us outside of online and just our resources.
And also in our community, it's important to offer some tobacco, go to a leader. Who's the leader here? Who is somebody who's respected? That is somebody you want to approach with humility and with a gift, a culturally appropriate gift. You can ask somebody from the tribe, you can ask some other person what that would be, but approaching with respect and asking for collaboration. We get a lot of, a lot of people want to come help the Native community, want to come and, save us. And that's not going to work. We are warriors, we're fighters. We have generations of survival, of resilience. Help is appreciated and the efforts are appreciated, but we really need to empower our communities. It has to come from within. If you're outside entity and want to work with the Native community, again, you need to approach in humility and with the leadership and create a connection. From there, you can start building on introductions and involvement.
Thank you for adding that, Brandy. It's very important.
I have a specific question from Carla. What kind of community support have you received, of any, from the casinos on the reservations in your area? You may not be living living on reserve to know that, so that's okay. You could just, if you know, great. If not,
Can you
leave it.
question? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Carla's asking, what kind of community support have you received, if any, from the casinos on the reservations in your area?
I wouldn't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, and there are not casinos in every Indigenous community. Um, it's a little bit of a harmful stereotype, and stereotypes about where those funds go and who benefits and how widely common or uncommon that is. Um, Although it is valid, as in trafficking does happen at casinos. Not only it can also happen in your backyard. It can happen at your backyard barbecue. It can happen anywhere. Um,
I have a question. This one is anonymous. How does the lack of reliable data or cases not being properly recorded in databases affect your ability to respond to the MMIWP crisis?
When that data is incorrect, we don't know who has been located. We don't know who is deceased, and we don't know anything. There's no information on that. So families are saying, hey, my loved one is still missing. And we're like, okay, let's look this up. Let's dive into this case. A lot of times when this information is incorrect, sometimes case numbers don't match photos, with photos don't match the right case. And sometimes they're not even in the right department or the right city, so they could have gone missing out of Washington, but the case is unfortunately in Oregon, for example. So a lot of times this creates so many more barriers for us to go out and search. We don't know, where is the ground zero? Where did this person go missing from? Was it a bar? Was it the forest? Was it a casino? Where was this person last seen at? What are the underlying struggles in this particular case? And the misclassification of ethnicity plays the biggest part, because we're looking for a Caucasian woman with blonde hair by just her name, instead of looking for a Native woman with dark eyes, dark hair, in that case, in this particular example. But so it does definitely matter, and it creates serious, serious problems for us, especially when we're going out to search.
I also believe it re-traumatizes when we have to keep asking questions to family members and loved ones of the victim, when we don't have the information at hand or can't find it. I mean, there's lots of hours that are put into researching and trying to find the information for the family members that are missing, or and it's not there. So we don't like to go back to the family and say, hey, can you explain this again? Can you go over the steps again? Because it's just, they have to go over it all over again. And if they just had that information, it just, it would make, it would just, yeah,
there are also
it would just
criminal.
be better.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. There are criminal networks that benefit exactly from this lack of information, from this gap. This has been a loophole that has been exploited, is known, and is exploited. It wasn't until 2017 the United States even counted Native American Indigenous as an ethnic group in their aggregate data of victims.
Thank you. I have another question, also from Anonymous. Could you speak more about the intersection of colonization and sex work? We have generally supported the decriminalization of sex work because the criminalization of it leads to harm for survivors and criminal records that keep people trapped. But we know that for many people, this policy doesn't feel like it reflects the harms of the industry has caused their communities. How do we balance working with law enforcement with histories of police brutality against sex workers and survivors?
So I just want to say really quickly that Human sex trafficking doesn't always look like prostitution on the street. It does not always look like sex work. In my particular situation, it was not that. Uh, and so that is an important question, but I want to say that that only addresses a portion of the cases that we're looking at.
I agree with you, Brandy. Um, Trafficking looks so much more than sex work. It's labor, it's coercion, it's many things. And they're not just children coming over in containers from other countries. It's in our own country. It's your backyard and your neighbors and all of those other things. And I think that's all I have to answer that question.
Freedom United, we've actually taken the stance to call for the decriminalization of sex work because for the purpose of building resilience against um, trafficking and exploitation. It is a very nuanced um, conversation, but there is intersections there where whether someone is coerced or someone is consensually in sex work, if there are laws that are making are criminalizing them and people around them, that makes them further vulnerable to being exploited and abused. So, and that doesn't obviously just apply for Indigenous communities, that's for everyone. So that is, as an anti-trafficking organization, our stance on that, and while we acknowledge the intersections. Um,
Yeah, I think that it's just another thing. The forced criminality is to be noted that that is one of the coercion techniques that is very often used, so that you are now made to be a criminal or said that you're a criminal, and that increases your fear, your identification with your maybe with your trafficker, and your fear of law enforcement, your fear of going to get help. And so when you take away that criminalization, when you add that nuance of understanding that sex work crimes that they call crimes um, may not be done consensually or be done under duress and coercion, understanding that nuance is extremely important to be able to allow victims to be able to go to help, saying, okay, I can go and somebody will help me. Okay, I did sell drugs, I did do this, I did that, and I'm afraid, but I did this of my own, without my own decision. So there's complexity there and nuance, but it's not a simple answer.
thank you.
Ellie, do you have any other questions in the chat?
Um, yes, I have one. Joseph is asking, where can you find Indigenous groups to donate or resources to support?
You can find them through Google. You can find them on Facebook. I always encourage people to look up groups and in your area that are local. I mean, if you feel like you want to reach out past that, by all means do that. Uh, but definitely just kind of look into their background a little bit. And I know the Medicine Wheel Riders is a great group, and they travel the entire United States. So there's a lot of Indigenous groups to get involved excuse me, and you can just throw stuff into Google.
Yeah, there's a lot of resources throughout the country, and so it depends sort of where you're at and what your intentions are. What are you offering? Or what are you interested? Are you wanting to collaborate? Are you wanting to donate? Are you wanting to participate in some way? Um, so again, identifying, through Google, through talking to people, what are the local groups? What's happening in our local areas? So, for example, in Portland, there's no Native American reservation in the Portland area, but we have a very vibrant multi-tribal um, community. Mostly folks have been coming since the 70s to our Native American rehabilitation center in Oregon. And so they brought their families. And so realizing in urban areas, we may have several tribes represented and with no distinct organization. When you're off the reservation or outside of the area of your particular support group, you're a native, but you may not have those connections in the city. So that's another level of complexity.
I think we're going to end the Q&A there.
Mhm.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today's discussion. And thank you to our outstanding panelists, Sabrina, Kimberly, and Brandy, and the Freedom United team for putting on this event. We will be sending out a recording of this event tomorrow, along with resources that we have gathered after this. And if you enjoyed the webinar and you found the information helpful, please consider making a small donation so that we can organize the next event. Again, thank you so much to everyone, and thank you so much for your support and for making the space and the time to have this conversation. It was difficult and it was important, and we're so grateful. And we are determined, and we're going to keep having these conversations. Thank you so much again. I'll post a link in the chat